Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have 3 stories for you from the MaliciousCompliance subreddit. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Mech Paul. You want to have girls over all the time? Okay, have it your way. The setup. I have a 2-bedroom house. I decided that I wanted to rent out the other bedroom in the house to make some money on space I wasn't really using after COVID. So I fixed up the place really nice. The tenant gets private, semi-attached bathroom. Bathroom is actually outside the bedroom, but I put up drapes between the bedroom and bathroom so tenant can walk between without me seeing. Common consumables. I pay for toilet paper, paper towels, laundry supplies, kitchen supplies, etc. I create the lease. The lease is very bare bones. It just says, you get a room at this property, you pay this much per month, landlord covers all utilities, your lease is X months long. I created the ad. In the ad, I mentioned how it's okay to have guests over, but keep it to no more than twice per month. I did not put this into the lease agreement. You can see where this is going. I do a showing for a prospect T. I tell him the guest policy and he seems just fine with it. I do the rest of the showing and all seems grand. He signs the lease agreement and moves in. The problem. The first month is grand. Anyone can fool someone for a month, but eventually you return to bad habits. His bad habit was women. He would have women over 4 to 5 nights per week. I did not appreciate this. I pulled him aside to tell him, hey, you're having a lot of girls over. You need to reduce how many girls come over, or if you're willing, to pay a bit extra for having all these girls over. I won't say a thing. He initially agrees with it. The next day, he calls me down and asks to speak with me at the dining room table. It's T and his girl du jour, G. T begins arguing, how can you ask for more money when that's not in the lease agreement? You can't ask for that. I told him the guest policy was in the ad and that we spoke about it when he came here. He said, yeah, but you can't ask for that. If it's not in the lease agreement, you can't do that. The guest policy isn't in the lease agreement either, so I pay rent. I can have over whoever, whenever I want. G piped in, you just need to take the L on this one and write better lease agreements. I replied to G, you're not on the lease agreement, so I don't give a crap what you think about it. I turned to T. It was in the ad. We also talked about it when you came here. You knew about this. T replied, whoa man, calm down. It's just 6 months, man. That's my lease term. I'll be out of your hair in 6 months. I replied, why can't you stay at her place? G said, that's none of your business. Shut up, G. I don't care what you think. You want a problem, T? You got one. This is not cool and you know it. Why does she have to be here 5 nights a week? She practically lives here. I signed a lease with you, T, not with her. Why is she here? He shrugged. Can't help it. Not in the lease agreement, man. That's what lease agreements are for. I was infuriated. We talked about this. He's choosing to follow the lease agreement. Okay, fine. What's a guy to do? I want him gone. I don't want T and G teaming up against me in my own house. They walked upstairs and turned on the loud music in their room. Later in the evening, G was downstairs cooking something on the stove by herself using my pots and pans. She's cooking for herself in my house. She's not even a tenant, but she sure is acting like one. G tried striking up a friendly conversation with me, but I just gave her absolute silence for 10 minutes while I cooked. I took my food upstairs. This is war. I'm going to follow the lease agreement to the letter. If I advertised a feature in the ad, but it wasn't in the lease agreement, that thing is gone. The compliance. Every day, I took something away. I first started by removing all the common consumables from the house. He texted me later, man, you removed all the consumables? You need to come down on the rent. I replied, not in the lease agreement. He said, it don't gotta be like this. I removed the drapes between his room and the private bathroom. I took away the chairs for the dining room table. I then shut off the clothes washer and dryer. Circuit breakers were in my room, and left taped up the location of a local laundromat. I also became an absolutely filthy roommate. I didn't clean anything. I left bags of garbage wherever I felt like. I never cleaned the kitchen and left the sink full of dishes. Please, man, can you clean up? No. I had maid service? Canceled that. I informed him of the change. Can you come down on the rent, man? Not in the lease agreement. You agreed to a rental price. Come on. I turned off the breaker to the stove and left out a wall outlet single pot electric plate for him to use. I turned off the microwave, not in the lease agreement either. I actually started feeling bad for him. G started coming around less and less as I made the living situation worse and worse. Finally, he texted me, "Do you want me to move out?" I replied, "Yes, when are you leaving my house?" He said, "End of the month, you'll let me break the lease?" I replied, "Of course." He left at the end of the month. I had my house back. I made for sure to make my next lease agreement way more specific about everything. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Just Me Patrick. It says, "It was malicious compliance on both sides. This is why contracts spell everything out. If not, then this is the result. Totally worth a consult with a lawyer specializing in landlord-tenant law anyway. You don't want to inadvertently run afoul of landlord-tenant laws for your city and state." I've got to admit, I am not up on landlord-tenant laws and all that stuff, so I don't know if OP can actually limit the amount of people that their renter has come over to the apartment. That just seems really odd to me because, like, this renter's not allowed to have a girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. How does that actually work? OP, I know this isn't AITA, but I'm gonna say you're the butthole in this case, because only allowing them to have somebody come over twice a month, that's absolute BS. You made a mistake on your lease, your tenant realized that and took advantage of it, that's completely on you. And then you acted like a little kid, took things away to force them out. I don't want to say too much more here because I was always told by my parents, if you can't say anything nice, shut your effing mouth. This story comes to us from Zigzag 1987. My dad told me to just walk home, so I did. I just remembered this old story of mine earlier today and thought it would be fun to share. I'm not 100% sure that this qualifies as malicious compliance since it wasn't intended to be at the time, but I'll let you readers be the judge. A long time ago, in the faraway year of 1999, I was a young 11-year-old boy finishing my last year of elementary school. Right before my birthday, which is in May, my parents called the family together for a meeting. They told us my mom had gotten a new job and we would need to move. We weren't moving too far away, only about an hour, but that still meant moving away from my friends and going to a completely different middle school than the one I'd thought I'd be going to. Elementary school wrapped up and we moved to our new house in early July. In August, my parents and I got to take a tour of the school and meet the principal and some of the teachers. That was when we learned that there weren't any buses that passed our new neighborhood. It was actually close to the school, so that meant I would be walking to and from there every day. My parents weren't too thrilled about this, but it was only 15 to 20 minutes walk and there was a path, so they came around on the idea pretty quickly. At the time, both of my parents worked full-time and 5 days a week. My mom worked Monday through Friday, and my dad worked Monday through Thursday and Saturday. Trust me, this is relevant. Since my older sister was away in college full-time, and they didn't trust me and my brother alone, my parents found a babysitter to be there when my brother and I would get home, and watch us until my parents got home. My brother was 2 years younger than me and in the local elementary school. The school year started, and in early September, we got a massive heat wave that reached highs of like 96 degrees for a couple days. The middle school was also an old building, and most of it was not air conditioned. I only had 2 classes that had AC in the classroom throughout the day. At the end of those days, I was tired and not in any mood to walk an additional 20 minutes in the heat before getting home. So I used vending machine snack money to call the babysitter from the payphone. Cell phones were definitely not used by kids in those days. The babysitter, thinking he was just not letting me suffer in the heat, came to pick me up, and I would do some homework before Batman Beyond and Pokemon came on. I did try to call home 2 more times over the next 2 weeks when it was hot. The second time, I got the sitter again. The third time I called was on a Friday. My dad answered. He was not happy with me. He told me it wasn't that hot, 85 that day, that I shouldn't call the sitter away from the house, and that I had to start growing up. He told me to walk home and we could talk more when I got there. So I walked home. I got a lecture and was told to not call the sitter again to be picked up. I said, okay, and told him I wouldn't call the sitter or him again to be picked up. 2 weeks later, at the end of September, a hurricane passed through the area. Halfway through the day at school, it really started coming down. It got so bad that they let us out of school a half hour early, like that was gonna save us. By this time though, a lot of roads were flooding and the line for payphones was long. I remembered what my dad told me a couple weeks ago, so I walked home. It took me almost 30 minutes to walk home from school that day, and I was drenched by the time I got home. The rain was coming down so hard, I couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of me. The roads were so flooded that the only way to drive in was with a car that had 4-wheel drive. When I got home, both my parents, mom got out of work early due to the storm, were there panicking because they hadn't heard from either the school or me. I just walked in through our garage, soaking wet, and said, "Hi mom, hi dad, I'm home." After they got over the initial shock and relief of seeing me home, my parents and I had this conversation. "How did you get home?" I walked. "Why?" Dad told me to. "When? We didn't get any calls from you or the school today." "Well, a couple weeks ago, I called the sitter a few times and asked for a ride home since it was hot. The last time I called, I got Dad. He told I had to just walk home from now on and not call for a ride again. I implied that there could be exceptions. You didn't say that." My mom turned on my dad and just told me to dry myself off and put my wet clothes in the dryer. I was drying myself off and I could hear them arguing. It was louder than the rain. When I was done and put my clothes in the dryer, my parents talked to me and told me I was allowed to call home, but only for emergencies. The next day, Saturday, my dad took me out to Blockbuster and I was told I could rent up to 5 movies for myself. He also paid for pizza that night and I got a whole pepperoni pizza for myself. That pizza lasted 2 days and no one else was allowed to touch it. My dad never lived that down. Good times. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Prof the Doom. It says, "For future parents, never underestimate what trouble the combination of adolescence attitude and the fact that 80% of people under 18 think they're invincible will cause. And never forget what you told them because they won't unless it was important." OP responded to this comment. It says, "Yeah, after this, my mom took charge and made sure I knew exactly what qualified as an exception to this rule." Laugh out loud. Okay, you know what's going on here? OP's just setting themselves up for the future. Because when they have kids of their own, and those kids are complaining about having to walk home from school, OP can look at them and go, "Nobody picked me up. I had to walk home in a hurricane." This story comes to us from FML, it's SML. New finance manager accidentally increases our pay when trying to cut it back. Note, the story takes place in the UK, but I changed the pounds for dollars to make it easier for foreign audiences to follow. This story goes back a few years now. I worked in graphic design. I was salaried, but was paid to be on call 1 week every month. The company had a long-standing structure of on-call payments where we get paid $200 a month to be on the on-call rota. And if and when we get called out, it's paid at around 130% of our calculated hourly salary rate for the time we clock in and clock out of work on a call-out. This worked fine for us and is important to note for the rest of this story. One day, we had a new finance manager introduce himself. He was in his early 20s and had been hired as a part of a graduate leadership program. We knew instantly he was going to be a pain because within the first 3 minutes of his half-hour-long speech, he talked about cost and value for money and expenditure multiple times. He didn't even mention graphics design at all, which is what we all did. Let's call this guy Mr. Butthats. To begin with, we gave Mr. Butthats the benefit of the doubt. New guy, new company, maybe he was just sticking to his comfort zone. Nuh-uh. Within 2 weeks, he'd mandated that all expenses had to be sent to him for approval. Cue queries like, "You're driving a transit, why did it cost you $60 to go 100 miles? And why did you fill up at Shell? Morrison's is cheaper." This eventually led to, "I don't want the trucks going home with you, please leave them at work and pick them up." Well, the reason it cost us $60 that one time was that we had 1.2 tons of product in the back, and we needed to run the engine whilst the pallets were being loaded and unloaded. Mr. Butthead didn't understand. In his finance textbook, there was no mention of logistics. The vans were going home with us because it'd save 30 to 60 minutes of a commute either way to get a van when we were moving products from customers and suppliers. Again, this was confusing to him because his textbook didn't say that everybody didn't actually live at the company and had that odd requirement to go to some weird place called home at 5 p.m. Naturally, none of the employees were happy about this arrangement, but it all fell away because of Mr. Butthat's second brilliant idea. Mr. Butthead also decided that we would get our on-call payments docked, a system that had worked since 1988, over 30 years of a perfectly working system. But of course, some idiot has to come along and try to change it. His big idea was to lose 1 hour of on-call. It was an easy saving on paper, since we all claimed one single extra hour on call every week. The way it worked was that whoever was handing over the on-call duty would claim half an hour to get the van fueled and valeted, and whoever was about to go on call would also claim half an hour to take a stock check of what was in the vans and reload as necessary. Every week, a different van would go out, and as we had 4 vans, this meant they also all got their monthly clean as mandated by the company. We'd worked this for years, and it was actually the idea of a retired director who'd previously worked as a paramedic. A weekly van refresh was worth the nominal amount that was paid out to one employee per week, and was also an incentive for being on call. Even if nothing happened, the on-call employee would get the equivalent of a free meal, and the vans would be stocked every Thursday, our on-call handover day, and good to go. During quiet periods, the vans, we had 4 of them, all got a run at least once a month so they didn't get flat batteries, and as whoever was on call got that van washed, cleaned and fueled, etc., we always had one presentable van 24/7. Anyway, back to Mr. Butthead. So when everybody heard they were losing an hour of on-call pay because it's our job to make sure we're ready no matter what, there were a lot of questions asked. Our senior finance manager doubled down. Having been Mr. Butthead's referral into the company, he agreed, saying, "You all drive, pick up the van from work. You can load it in company time whilst you're here. You have gate codes, so if you're on call, you will need to take a van from your place of work." Sure, twat. Time for some malicious compliance. Coincidentally, the next 6 weeks were very busy on calls. As mentioned, Mr. Butthead's textbook didn't cover how people don't live at the office. So instead of taking a van home and being ready to go at 3 a.m. when the overnight press has our samples ready, or our client has just published their final design markup that they want reviewed and on the machines for 6 a.m., or, most commonly, having to drive to an event with some extra flyers, bags, lanyards, etc. because the client was overbooked, we were spending anywhere between 30 to 90 minutes commuting to the office to pick up a van, driving to wherever the issue was. Sometimes it was directly back via the on-call employee's house, and then the same time back. Whilst we weren't paid fuel mileage for driving to work for our normal hours, we were given the standard 40 cents a mile when we had to drive our own cars outside of working hours. If we couldn't or didn't want to drive, the spouse needs the car in the morning for the school run, insurance doesn't cover driving after 11 p.m., car needs a service, etc., the company would pay for a taxi. If we were driving one of the vans, we weren't paid mileage, just our standard on-call payment. Mr. Butthead very quickly went from our enemy to our best friend, when we realized we'd be getting paid significantly more to drive to the office, pick up the van, and then head to wherever we needed to go. Plus, after the job, coming back to the office and then driving home again. One of my colleagues lived about 60 miles away from the office, and on one occasion where he'd had 9 callouts in 1 week, each time having to drive to the office and back, he'd effectively doubled what he'd have been paid weekly. We realized that this was costing the company money, but hey, them's the rules. So we happily kept up this new routine. The extra driving was a bit of a pain, but the knowledge that we were getting paid extra for it made it a very easy rule to follow. Mr. Butthead probably realized that, as we weren't complaining, something must be wrong. He checked and was shocked to find out that his massive savings of about $250 per month, 4 times 1 hour on-call payments, was instead leading to about $500 of extra monthly mileage payments, and an extra $1,000 in monthly on-call payments. Not to mention that customers were complaining that what was a 20-minute response time was now about an hour. And one customer had noticed that one of the on-call employees would drive past their facility in his car, only to come back 40 minutes later with a van. Then, 40 minutes after he'd left, they saw him driving back the way he came in his car. We'd initially complained about this for a while, but it fell on deaf ears. As soon as our company director heard complaints from the customers though, time for action. Suddenly, we were allowed to take the vans home again. Our on-call handover was reinstated. Mr. Butthead was moved out of our team. I was naive, still am to be honest, so I thought this was fine. However, a lot of the other people I worked with said no, we have our new way of working, that's how it's meant to be. Some people said that they'd bought another car or a bigger car now that they didn't need to park a van at home anymore, so they were unable to take a van home again. I don't believe this was actually true, but we stood behind the point. I worked there for another year and left to pursue my career, but until I left, Mr. Butthead's policy remained. Everybody who worked on call continued to leave the vans at the office, drive there to pick them up, do a job, drop it off at the office, then drive home again. Mr. Butthead disappeared for a while and we never heard about him again. I checked the corporate directory and saw he was missing, so I assume he was shown the door. The senior finance guy was still in the company, but had absolutely no say in what we did. He was moved down from client manager to supplier coordinator, which I assume means he's now living his life, checking contracts and financial statements. Ouch. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Zorby1. It says, always wait a month to learn how and why things are done before making changes. That right there is some solid advice for a new manager. If you don't understand the job that you're managing, you really can't effectively manage it. We've said this in so many of these videos. If you spend some time getting to know what you're actually managing, maybe even doing the job yourself for a while, which is how I think most companies should be run, then you can effectively manage that division. But when you have people who have been working there a lot longer than you, even just talking to them, asking them what works and what doesn't work will allow you to make much better decisions as a manager in that department. Unfortunately, most new managers just don't work like this. And if and when we get called out, it's paid at around 130% of our calculated hourly. And if and when we get called out, it's paid at around 130% of our calculated hourly salary. How do you say that? And if when we get called out, it's paid at around 130% of our calculated hourly salary rate. Hourly salary. Oh, yay. And if and when we get called out, it's paid at around 130% of our calculated hourly salary rate for the time we clock in and clock out of work on a call out. Woohoo!